we opened NFI after 6 months, and on the day when we came and opened the gates, the first thing that struck us was the blue sky, giving a wonderful background and for the profile of NFI. So we clicked the shot, and you can see the blue sky of Delhi and the entire building. May I have the next slide, please? As compared to this really blue sky, I'm sure you also see the grayish background that inevitably happens in the usual Delhi smoggy weather. Next slide, please. I am showing you briefly the balcony of Dr. Gopalan's room, from where he used to sit, watch the lawn where all children working in NFI used to sit during lunch hour on the grass and eat, and vitamin D levels were absolutely in good shape because 1 hour they spent in the sun between 1 and 2. So every small bit of practical nutrition, aesthetics, people's comfort were always looked after by Dr. Gopalan, and that is how NFI, which he served for 40 years, is where it is today. Next slide, please. Even when we walk in now into NFI, he is there to welcome us, greet us, assure us that he is always there with us to guide us, to help us, and at the same time sternly telling us, perform, you shall strive, and you shall keep, as he used to say, keep the flag flying and ensure the best in public health nutrition is always given to all needy citizens in this country. So we remember him with gratitude, be able to perform according to the standards that he set and maintained for 40 years in this institute. We chose as a theme for this inaugural Dr. C. Gopalan Memorial Webinar a topic which was very close to his heart. When he came back from UK in 1950, he took up research position in Nutrition Research Laboratory in Kunnur, and he did not go into the then fashionable areas of research of micronutrients, immunology and whatever. He took up basic things that affect common people in the country. Nutritional status of pregnant, lactating women, especially those who were working in the plantation in and around Nilgiris. Nutritional status of school-age children and under 5 children under whom we had major nutritional problems. From there, for the next decade, even when he moved into Hyderabad, the focus of his research team was always in the underprivileged, underserved, undernourished men, women, and children. It was a logical shift then when he came to NIN and big National Institute of Nutrition was built up to move on to 2 other areas: nutrient requirements and nutritive value of Indian foods. Since 1970s, National Institute of Nutrition under his leadership had always played the premier role in all these 3 areas, and I'm sure all of you know, last Monday, Honorable Health Minister released the 2020 Nutrient Requirement of Indians - the Recommended Dietary Allowances of Indians. This is a path-breaking event and hopefully will guide us through the next 20 years when we will be learning to live with and cope with dual nutrition burden, micronutrient deficiency, not to talk about the current COVID crisis. We have an excellent panel of speakers, and I hope all of you will continue to watch for the next 3 hours and also send us a feedback so that when we come back to you on November 28th, we will improve and give you things that will be far more attractive and fully meeting your expectation. May I now request Dr. Saroj Chudamani Gopal, President of NAMS, to talk about Dr. Gopalan as the scientist who put nutrition science in India on the global map and is generally considered in the country as the father of nutrition sciences in India. You know, today 400 people have registered for this. About half of them were people who were his students, whom he nurtured. And you know the age group? 50 to 85. And it speaks volumes of the kind of fervent affection and loyalty that he was able to generate in us. And we hope we will be worthy of the tradition that he set up. Dr. Saroj.
Thank you, Prema Ramachandranji. Like Gopalanji is really God's blessing on a person like you. She has very well highlighted about Dr. Gopalan because she has worked with him and has been very favorably. I understand she was very much liked by him all the time, and she is really furthering the cause for which Dr. Gopalan stood. I would just like to remind that he was born in 1918, and this was the year actually when the nutrition laboratory in India was started. And that was started in a small room in Louis Pasteur laboratory in Kunun, Tamil Nadu, Nilgiris. And from that small laboratory, it grew to a big institution. And fortunately, it was God's design that God was creating, giving birth to a person who was to head that institution, who was not only just to head that institution, but who was to make India a global hub for a pioneering leader for the care of nutrition, not only but nutrition for the one who are not cared for. He started focusing. Dr. Gopalan was a very brilliant scholar. He did his MBBS from Medical College Madras and also his MD, and then proceeded to UK. And in UK, he finished his PhD just in 30 months. And you can imagine how brilliant he must have been. And those days, MD in medicine usually would go for practice or would go for any teaching institution, because most of the teaching institutions were allowed at practice also and would be almost roaring in money. But then he decided to devote himself for research, because it is the research that guides the whole world, any field. And this is today, we see the fruits of his devotion to research. How did he get inspired for nutrition? Because this was the time in 1942 when he was doing his MD final, that he saw people suffering from severe deficiency, because 1942, one would like to remember, was the days of severe famine in the country. And Bengal and part of the south were very badly affected. deficiency of beriberi was the cause for adding on severe high mortality with feminine. And he got attracted that I must have to do something for the care of nutrition, particularly in the group which are sort of lacking the attention of the people. It is usually the rich will attract the attention of the people. But he cared for the malnourished, he cared for the undernourished, he cared for children, and he cared for women. And then under his leadership, this small laboratory got into a huge institution called Nutritional Institute of India, NIN. And then he served this institute for nearly 60 years. And in 1973, he moved on to ICMR as Director General of ICMR. And his passion for how are the nutrition affecting the health, affecting the person for infection and even for non-infective diseases made him a pioneer for instituting many more institutions, which Professor P.K. Dave would be highlighting his contribution in many other fields. And I would like to just reiterate that his contribution towards nutrition made him not only father of nutrition in India, but he projected India as a global leader for looking after nutrition of masses. Thank you very much, Madam Prema Ramachandran, to have given me this opportunity to speak about this great man. And we would all like to follow into his footsteps, try to help the country in whatever way we are in the best possible way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chudamani. May I now request Dr. Dave to speak a few words about Dr. Gopalan as a institution builder.
Can I start speaking now?
Yes, sir.
The moment you enter this magnificent building of Nutrition Foundation of India, you see a photograph of Dr. Gopalan, whom I had known earlier, and now he looks as if he is still there, talking to you and living absolutely fine. I think he was the nutrition builder. He was an institution builder. And in many ways, I think this was done. He had the research laboratory started. He was the director of National Institute of Nutrition, and which he built as a research cum training institute in nutrition, not only for India, but also in the entire Southeast Asia. Under his directorship, NIN undertook two holistic studies on nutritional problems, and included in epidemiological studies, biochemical and therapeutic components, and provided useful lead to the Government of India for policy and program formulation to improve the nutritional status of the vulnerable people of India. He was also the Director General of Indian Council of Medical Research, and he invested his time and energy towards strengthening the existing ICMR network of institutions dealing with both communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases, and in building institutions devoted to research on leprosy, malaria, filariasis. In fact, I would like to say that, and this is impromptu from, he was actually an institution builder. And once he came back from England after doing his PhD, he started his made institutions, and ultimately he became director of ICMR, from where he retired again which was a non-governmental organization devoted to improve the nutritional well-being of Indians. It's no surprise that the nutritional status of people in India is extremely poor, even now. And I think the legacy which Dr. Gopalan left with us, I think will stand us in good stead in improving the nutritional foundation in India. He was awarded so many things. His contribution as father of nutrition science in the country, an eminent institution builder, Government of India conferred Padma Bhushan Award on him. NAMS recognized his contribution by conferring him with the Lifetime Achievement Award, which Dr. Suramane spoke about. I think people of his stature build institutions. Not only that, they build people who work under those institutions. And I'm told how many? 400 people have already joined. They are the people who understood him, who learned from him, and greatly honored people have done so much for nutrition in this country. I think nutrition is a problem in this country, and people like him really have done something so much for the nutrition building in this country. I would say that Dr. Gopalan is an institution builder, not only as a scientist, as a doctor, as a physician, and as an institution builder, absolutely. And the building that he made here for Nutrition Foundation speaks for itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you
I
very
remember,
much.
actually, I conferred the award on him
Yes,
also.
right here.
Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yes, you came here and conferred. Thank you very much, sir, for that excellent personal touch, which you always have and which you always did as far as NFI and Dr. Gopalan are concerned. We now move over to the main part of the program, and I request Dr. We have three speakers. Dr. Anurag Kurpad, who will talk about energy requirements again. I will then talk about my favorite topic, nutrition, energy requirements during pregnancy and lactation. And finally, Dr. Rajan Shankar of Tata Institute, Kini, will talk about micronutrient requirements. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
I am audible. Okay, fine. May I now request Dr. Dave to introduce Anurag Kurpad? Sir.
Professor Anurag Kurpad,
Department of Physiology at St. John's Medical College and Division of Nutrition at St. John's Research Institute. He is a Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, London, National Academy of Medical Science, NAM, and of the International Union of Nutrition Science in India. He has been awarded the prestigious Wellcome Trust India Alliance Margdarshan Fellowship in 2015. Dr. Kurpad set up a suitably isotope and physiology unit to work on protein and amino acids as requirements. His studies provided the basis for the 2007 WHO UNU expert committee. He has the rapporteur of that committee and revision of the promotion and amino acid requirements. He is the chairperson of the ICMR Expert Committee on Nutritional Requirement of Indians. The document was released by Honorable Health Minister last Monday. He presented his presentation on the energy requirement of Indians at that time. I think it's a great honor for anybody to speak on nutrition in this country. Professor.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Prema. I hope I'm audible and I hope you can see my slides. I am truly honored to give this talk today. Dr. Gopalan, I never had the honor of being taught by him, but I have been stimulated by him to think, and I recall him talking with me at the NFI building in the office on the first floor, where he would engage in dialectics on, at that time, amino acid requirements, and his questions were so penetrating and deep. And it was a marvel for me that, we were thinking, that he was thinking so deeply about the problem. It was such an honor, because even now, if you think about it, when kwashiorkor is beginning to show its face in new places in the world, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where people are finding children now with kwashiorkor because of the intake of untreated cassava, many of them write to me to ask me for Dr. Gopalan's original papers on kwashiorkor, and he is greatly admired, I have to tell you, not just by the scientists who are working in the field, but also by those around the world who are truly worried about kwashiorkor. And if you thought it had gone away, well, it's still there and it is reappearing. So I am truly honored to be here today, and I'm going to be talking to you about the energy requirement of Indians. And I will focus on the recent ICMR NIN energy norms for adults and children. But importantly, rather than going too deep into how they were derived, I will tell you how they were derived. But I think the implications of this norm are very important for many things. But I will choose to talk about poverty, hunger, supplementary nutrition for children, and how we should be treating children with catch-up growth in severe acute malnutrition. Now, very briefly, I just want to tell you about the concepts that were there in the new document. The concept that underpinned what we did was this, that if you take a normal population and plot the intakes of that population against their requirements, so requirements on the y-axis, intakes on the x-axis, in effect, you have two bell-shaped curves. One is a bell-shaped curve of the requirements, and the second bell-shaped curve is that of the intakes. Now remember, these are normal populations. There is no undernutrition in them. Yet there is a variation represented by two bell-shaped curves. How do you use these bell-shaped curves to come to figuring out what that population needs to eat as a single number? What you do is you actually begin to start overlapping those bell-shaped curves. And when you overlap those bell-shaped curves, you'll find that normally they should overlap with their central tendency being almost the same. And half that population, their intakes will be below that mean requirement, half will be above. This does not mean that those below are undernourished, not at all. It means that there is in a normal population a set of individuals, some of whom have a lower requirement, either because of adaptation or genetic reasons, and some of whom who have a higher requirement. But all of them are eating and not undernourished. And based on this, we realized, therefore, that if we wanted a single number to represent the requirement of individuals or in a population, a single number is very important for policy. Then we really need to work with the average, knowing full well that if a population had intakes that distributed around that average requirement, they should be normal. So you expect 50% to be below and 50% to be above. If, for example, 80% were below, you would start to get worried that maybe there was some undernutrition. But 50 is the normal. The old value that was there, which was called the RDA, is a value that really is the right-hand tail of this distribution of requirements. And here I have put it on the left in the yellow box. The EAR, or the estimated average requirement, is the population requirement. It's a single number. The RDA is something that was used in the past, and it was really in the days when undernutrition was very prevalent. And what one wanted was to just have a very, very safe intake. And therefore, an RDA was taken to represent the right-hand tail of the requirement distribution. However, as we have progressed, there's a great possibility that one can overnourish populations. And we are beginning to see this in India, certainly. So what really is the point is that we really need to do away with that RDA. We have kept it in this new book that has been released in a sense of continuity. But honestly, you really need to work with the EAR. Of course, it'll be nice when you're dealing with individuals in a clinical situation that one can have more than the EAR. But it's not the RDA you should be worried about, but now what we call the tolerable upper limit of intake. That is the intake at which the risk of overnutrition begins to rise. And in some nutrients, that value is quite close to this distribution. An example is iron, and another one is vitamin E. It is not good to have intakes that approach or are equal to the TUL in any population or any individual. So here's the thing, that you really require the EAR and the TUL. The RDA still remains, but please don't hang your hat on that. It is the EAR, and worry if your intakes go near the TUL. And all this has come out in this book. And I really want to tell you that this book had a very knowledgeable and excellent expert committee that worked very hard. Dr. Prema is right there, and she was a very, very important member of this committee. And I do want to acknowledge Dr. Hemalata, who was so helpful and so important to the production of this book. And she, along with the staff at NIN, really wrote so hard over the last 2 years. It took 2 years to actually get this out. And I also want to acknowledge the former director of NIN, Dr. Shashikaran, who actually, to my mind, really put a sense of urgency to the requirements. Because when he was the director, he actually gave a great deal of impetus and momentum to the book that came out in 2010. And we really rode on that energy that he put into it to start working on this in 2018. So my hats are off to all these people. Now, as I move on for energy, I just want to tell you very clearly, although we have talked about RDA in this book, you can see it in the title, there is no RDA for energy. This is one nutrient for which you do not have any RDA. You only have the average requirement, and sometimes people use estimated energy requirement. So instead of EAR, they call it the EER. So everything I talk about going forward from here is the EER. So the requirement, the method, as you all will know, is not based on intake measurements, it's based on expenditure measurements. And to get the expenditure, there are two ways to do it. The first is what we call a factorial method, which assumes that energy is based primarily on a basal metabolic rate and a physical activity level called the PAL. This is the most common method because you can actually predict the BMR if you have the weight and age of a population or an individual. And if you could do a questionnaire, you can get the physical activity level. So just with weight, age, sex, and a physical activity questionnaire, you can figure out the energy requirements. But this is a factorial method. If you really want to get it as a total single measurement, you can use techniques which are based on stable isotopes, and this is called the doubly labeled water method, or DLW. It is available in India. It has been used. So I will show you some of that. There are some problems. The BMR, either for a population or for an individual, is predicted from age and sex-specific equations. There are many equations. The WHO equation, which was called the Schofield equation, is the one that is used today. But there are clinical equations that are used in clinical nutrition, which are called the Harris-Benedict, the Owen and the Mifflin equations. All of them have problems. And the reason the problem exists is that equations are derived from populations, and they represent the population they were derived from. For example, the WHO equation, the Schofield equation, was heavily skewed towards the measurement of army recruits in Italy. And this was research done by the National Institute of Nutrition in Italy by Dr. Anna Ferroluzzi. And if you had muscular, active young men with a lot of muscle, less fat, you'd probably have a higher BMR. And the problem is that if we want to go back to this database and look at it as I've tried, the problem is FAO doesn't have this database anymore. It's disappeared. So it's hard to go back and perhaps remove those muscular active young men and try and add other people from Asian populations because the original database doesn't exist. So we are stuck with the WHO equation, which will never be changed. Now, the Indian BMR, and there were great measurements made by Prakash Shetty and Mario Suarez at Bangalore in the 80s and 90s, and they at that time found that the BMR was lower than what was predicted by the WHO Schofield equation. And at the time, we kept it at that and thought maybe there was some kind of adaptation, fair enough. But then subsequently, this has been repeated in many countries in Asia. The problem with those papers as they're coming out today is that many of the people who measure BMR don't follow the rules. BMR has very, very critical rules to follow. If you just pick up a subject from home, bring them in and measure the BMR and what you think is the BMR in the morning, you're actually measuring the resting metabolic rate, which is roughly 10% higher. So it is a critical problem to try and pull together data from Asia. But the Indian data that was collected is very, very rigorous. And it is lower by about 10%. If you had a lower BMR, you will have a lower energy requirement. Now, what happens if you don't, if for example, you could not measure the weight of anybody? Then it comes to the point where you have to take a norm or a normative weight. Now in India, what we have decided to do is to take a weight based on an aspirational height. That aspirational height is the 95th percentile of the population values. You find the weight for this height that would correspond to a normal BMI, and that was 65 kilos for men and 55 kilos for women. Now, so here we have, you do not have any measurements of weight, but you want to still give a value for the population. Take the normative weight, and the normative is now 65. It was 60 before, and 55 for women. And now you can predict BMR, but the question is, which equation would you use? The WHO equation or the Indian equations? Now, another problem is that the physical activity level in Indians seems to have fallen off a lot. We can't assume that we are a country that does a lot of manual work. And this is a paper that came out in Nature, which looked at app-based step counts from smartphones and self-reported BMIs in nearly 750,000 people around the world. Now, there are problems with this, so please don't hold me to these data. But as a comparator, it seems quite clear that India falls below 4,500 steps per day compared to many European countries and the Americas, where the steps may be higher. Now, this is the actual value for India, is 4,300 steps per day. But look at the important thing, that in the female self-reporting from the app steps, it's much lower. For men, it's higher. This is a great gender divide. And so this gender gap is a problem. We are low, and we have to take this into account when we think about prescribing an energy requirement for our population. Remember, the BMR may be lower, and now we're talking about a physical activity level that's lower. There's a good reason why our PAL may be lower in Indians. In a very nice study done by Dr. Rebecca Kurian and Parvati Ishwaran at St. John's, they actually took low BMI and normal and high BMI women, and they measured the physical activity expenditure. It's called the PAR. They measured that for a variety of different activities, walking with a weight, walking just by themselves, or ironing clothes, walking faster. And you will see that in general, the higher the BMI, the higher the physical activity. That makes sense. If you are heavier, you have to carry a higher weight as you move around. So you will spend more energy. And if you take that and you think that Indians may have lower BMIs than many other populations, then it is likely that even that could be a reason why our PAL could be lower. And finally, in a study of millennials or young adults in their 20s to 30s, and remember I told you there's a way to measure energy expenditure totally, it's the double labeled water method. This careful study was done by a young student called Shrishti Sinha, along with Rebecca in St. John's. And they did this very careful study and also measured the BMR the right way. They really carefully measured BMR. Now, if you've got the total energy expenditure and you divide it by BMR, you can get the physical activity level. It also allows you to validate that BMR equation of FAO-WHO. And here's what they found, that if they actually predicted the energy requirements by the FAO method, the actual measurement was 13% lower. The measured BMR was 7% lower. The physical activity was about 1.35. And if they actually compared it with what those subjects reported in a questionnaire, you will see that most people think that they're more active than they actually are. People forget that they were actually sitting around doing nothing. Many people go for a walk, and they do well going for that walk. But soon after the walk, they come home and they sit down and watch television. So that balances out what happens for the walk. So these problems are there, and that's why self-reports have to be looked at very rigorously. But here is the measured PAL, 1.35. And I recall when the WHO FAO was defining the energy requirements, there was a discussion. What do you think is the lowest PAL for a normal living person? And at that time, it was thought to be 1.37. In other words, this is what you would prescribe for a patient in a ward, a patient who is able to get up, go to the bathroom, come back to bed, but lies down all day. 1.37. Look what we find, 1.35. And this is the point I will make to you, that as much as we tell people, you must go out and walk, go out and do good physical activity, what we don't tell people is, don't come back after that and sit down in your chair. Because that completely negates what you did. And it is the problem that we face whenever we deal with patients. So as a result, if you look at the yellow highlights below, the ICMR 2020 guideline actually takes the lowest of the range of values prescribed by FAO, WHO, UNU in their latest book. And this is lower than what was taken by the ICMR 2010. Note that for moderate activity and for heavy activity, nothing was changed. It's the same value as before. The key was for sedentary people, what is that physical activity level? Now, there's a philosophical question, but before I get to that, I mean, many of my leftist and socialist friends would often tell me, how do you know 2.3 is correct? I mean, have you ever done any manual labor in your life? Do you know what it is like to actually sit and dig a ditch all day? And do you think that what you're prescribing is adequate? Well, to be honest, I don't. I have not done manual labor for a whole day in my life. And the problem is that I would tell my socialist friends that the only way out of this is to use this doubly labeled water method and actually go out and measure the energy requirements of farmers during the harvest, during the sowing season, just to get an idea of what's going on. There are many complications here. I used to measure the energy requirements of manual laborers building buildings where they carry loads on their head, and they take the bricks and they take it from one place to another. They carry cement. And when I did those measurements, I actually tried to do the same activities. And my energy expenditure for those activities was far higher than of the manual laborers. There is an economy of movement that they begin to practice. It comes with practice. And they begin to reduce their energy expenditure in those movements. So that's a complication. So it's very hard for a desk person like myself to try and imagine what is the requirements of somebody who actually works very hard. But it can be done. That's my point. And this is something that should be done in this country, where we actually measure what is the requirement, because the double labeled water method is available. It has been used by our own military to measure the requirements of energy for soldiers at very high altitudes, at the desert. So it's been used in the hardest of circumstances, but it's possible to do it. It's an easy method operationally. But there is a philosophical problem, which Dr. Prema knows all about, because I spent a great deal of time discussing this with her. The question was this. Here we are prescribing an energy norm for the country. We have reduced the physical activity value from 1.53 to 1.4 for sedentary individuals. So the question that we often talked about was, do you reduce the value, or do we keep it where it was and then tell the population, please go out and be more active, because that is good for your health. So you must eat more, but be more active. Or do we say, well, let's try and prevent obesity and overweight and go for a prescriptive value that is lower? And I remember Dr. Prema's great help in deciding this, and it was something that truly kept us awake at nights, and I hope she will remember that. But here's something to tell you why I think this is reasonable. I will refer back to a very old study done by Jean Mayer in Calcutta, along with two Indian, Roy and Mitra, who were two Indian collaborators. This was done in the Ludlow Jute Mill in Calcutta, and where they looked at energy intake on this figure, on the y-axis, versus a variety of different activities. And here at the very heavy work, you'll see blacksmiths, coalmen, ashmen, carriers of loads. And on the very low activity were stall holders. These were people who sat behind a stall all day, did not move. And what Jean Mayer found was that in a certain way, as people work harder or are more active, they eat more. There seems to be some kind of a regulation, we call it a self-regulation, that if you work harder or you're more active, you will match your energy intake to what you expend. The problem is that as you become less active, your energy intake, that whole regulation goes out of the window. And people eat more if they're sedentary. In fact, the stallholders ate as much as a blacksmith. And this was the problem. And this lack of regulation is why we decided that let us be safe and go for 1.4. If people get active, there's no doubt they will self-regulate their energy intake and they will increase it. But if they are not active, there is no way they should be eating 1.53. They should be eating 1.4. So the philosophy is there. And of course, we can argue about this. And I look forward to those arguments. But at present, this is where we are. So based on all these considerations, these are the new norms. adult men 65 kg, adult women 55 kg, and you'll see a comparison between ICMR 2020, ICMR 2010. The difference is about 200 calories for sedentary. But for the moderate and heavy work, it is much less. You will notice that for men, the difference is less, but that's because the normative weight went up by 5 kgs. And the difference overall is because of a lower BMR at the sedentary level. Okay? Oh, at all levels. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say at the sedentary. Now, what are the implications of all this? I'm sure it excites everyone. Beyond just prescribing energy for a person, what does this mean for our society? The first implication is poverty. And poverty is really a difficult concept. It's an emotional concept. And the Rangarajan Committee did a great job in trying to get some idea of poverty. All of us have a different idea about poverty. I want you to know this. Each of you will have a different way of looking at poverty and defining it. But however, if you have a norm for poverty, the key is not to use energy alone. It's only a part of the estimation. There's a whole basket of requirements and services that a person requires to be considered as being above a poverty line. And the nutrient intake is just one of them, and that's energy. Now, the earlier norm for energy for poverty used by the Rangarajan Committee was 2155 calories for rural and 2090 for urban. And this is a weighted average. Now, with the new norms, I just recalculated them using the same Rangarajan Committee method, and it comes down by about 100 calories. That's because the BMR is lower. Remember that. The point is, how does this influence the poverty line? Now, if we accept the Rangarajan Committee and we recalculate the poverty line just based completely on the assumptions there, I've not changed anything else. The poverty line reduces by 1 rupee, and the proportion below the poverty line reduces by 2%. So I personally think that the new norm does not in any way affect our poverty estimates. Of course, there are many, many considerations around this. This is a very rough estimate, so we leave it there. But there's a more troubling thing. Just like poverty, there's something called hunger. And there are all sorts of ways of looking at hunger. I can tell you, all of you listening will have your own opinion on how you should define hunger. Again, there are some groups that decided, well, maybe we should make an index of hunger. And they came out with this thing called the Global Hunger Index. And in 2019, they published the index for different countries, 117 countries, and said India ranked 102. And India was actually lower than all its neighbors in South Asia. And that is a problem, because you have to think, is this correct? Is there something wrong here? Because we seem to have an economy that does rather well. Or is it that there's a huge disparity in India? What's going on? So it's important to understand, how does energy affect hunger? What is that norm, and how does it affect this hunger estimation? It is a contentious index, and I'll tell you why I think the metrics are uncertain. There are 4 metrics used for the Global Hunger Index, one of which is called Undernourishment. And that is the share of population whose caloric intake is thought to be less than what is required for survival. Now you can ask me, how do you know how much is required for survival? Well, it's called the minimum dietary energy requirement. I'll tell you more about that. There are other indexes here as well: child wasting, child stunting, and child mortality. I have problems with all of these. But at the end of the day, that's for another day and another discussion. Today we are working with energy, so let me stick to undernourishment. Now, what is that value that is used that tells you what the minimum requirement is for survival? This was set up by the FAO. And the FAO defined it as the MDER. And they said that is what is required to maintain the minimum acceptable BMI of adult men and women engaged in low physical activity, in other words, sedentary. So they are fighting for survival. They probably have reduced their energy levels to sedentary, and you have to think, what is the minimum acceptable BMI? So how did they define an acceptable BMI? Well, they went back to WHO 1995. And WHO 1995 in turn went back to NHANES in 1991, which is the survey of US adults. And from that data set, they got the weight, and from that weight, they predicted the BMR. They used a sedentary PAL, and based on that, they came up with 1,800 calories per day. Now, this is quite useful, in my opinion, if you have a disaster somewhere and you know how many people are there, and you want to calculate the minimum food that you need to supply to them. You kind of say, fine, give what you think is the minimum dietary energy requirement. Fair enough. But there are problems for me, because now if you look at ICMR-NI in 2020 and you take the average of sedentary men and women, take the average, you get 1,885 kilocalories. And you compare that with the MDER, which is meant as absolutely the lowest, is 1,800. And you begin to think, is India actually at this level where everyone is at this low requirement? What's going on? Is there something wrong with the MDER metric? Well, yes, it's the body weight. It always matters. The body weights from the NHANES 1 survey and the NNMB urban survey for men, if you plot them, this is what the NHANES, the blue line, looks like, and this is where the NNMB values are. And you take the 5th percentile, just like the FAO wanted. Take the 5th percentile for NHANES, and you take the 5th percentile for NNMB, and you see their big difference. In fact, the 5th percentile for the American men corresponds to the 20th percentile for Indians. And immediately you begin to think, if you're going to use weights, is there something like a weight for all the whole world, one population that represents the whole world? In the 1990s, yes, they had better data only for few countries. But as we have progressed, India has good data. And if we have good data, there is no reason to think that we should not be using our own data for calculating the 5th percentile. And remember, we have a lower BMR and we have a lower physical activity level. And if you use those considerations, as I've told you, taking the FAO, the body weight at the 5th percentile was 45.5 kilos for American men, and this value of PAL, they got a value of, adjusted for the demographics, by the way, you have to do all those adjustments, they got a value of 1,802. Exactly the same way. Take the NNMB 5th percentile and the lower BMR, and you will notice that now you get a value of 1,550 or so for Indians. In fact, that is with a PAL of 1.55. If you take a value of 1.4, it will be even lower. Now, this to me actually makes a lot more sense. We really need to use our own data. And this is what Dr. Gopalan always fought for. And I did admire him for that he always felt we should do what we have to do for ourselves. Now, if you see, and you start calculating the proportion of undernourishment, that's the first metric in the Global Hunger Index, you'll notice that they use the NSSO data for India, and they found that 14.3% of people were below 800, but it comes to almost half that if you take 1,500 calories, for example. Now, I've not taken the exact values. Now, I'm as nationalist as they come. And I think, but I never thought of actually recalculating the Global Hunger Index. And I think to do that, you'll have to recalculate the Global Hunger Index of all the countries, because the same considerations would apply to other countries as well. The point is that we have to just understand that metrics are metrics. And if they are badly done, don't bother about them. So I'm no cardboard nationalist. I do feel very strongly about these things. But at the end of the day, the question is, should we really be fighting this battle? It doesn't matter. It's just a perception, and it's done by people who don't understand these metrics. So that's the second implication over here. Let me move to children. Now, very briefly in children, the requirements were measured by doubly labeled water. These data were available, and I just want to point out this fact, which will come later, that if you take the average requirement of 6 to 12-month-old infants or children up to 6 years, on average, the requirement is 80 calories per kg per day. Please remember that number. Now, how do we figure out the supplementary nutrition norms in India based on these values? The present norm, which is followed by the ICDS, is 500 calories per day for children between 6 months to 6 years. And if they are malnourished, in other words, they have a low weight for age, then it goes up to 800 calories per day. But again, metrics. What is the real energy gap? Now, if you take the NNMB rural intake data, which was very helpfully provided by Dr. Lakshmaya, who is the custodian of the NNMB, and you clean those data and look at the gap. But remember this, the supplementary nutrition norm is meant to prevent malnutrition, not to treat it, to prevent it. And to prevent it, then you only have to look at the gap in those whose children whose weight for age is not below -2. That means they're not malnourished by your standard. They are, I'm not saying greater than -2 means it's good, but at least they don't fall into that malnourished tag. Now you take those children alone because you want to prevent malnutrition in them and calculate the gap against the ICMR NIN 2020 requirement. You'll find that the gap is 250 kilocalories per day. And actually the risk of protein inadequacy is quite low. It's hardly 6%. The real macronutrient that doesn't get in children is fat. The fat is the deficit, the gap is between 10 to 20 grams per day in India. That's huge for these children. So there is a problem. So this 250 kilocalories is to prevent it. And if you want to treat it, then you double it. And instead of 800, it's 500 calories per day, which makes sense because this is not total nutrition, it's supplementary nutrition. These terms are very, very important. And I think that if by giving 500 kilocalories per day, we are actually overfeeding children with the wrong foods because the only food you can buy 500 calories worth with the financial norms that are presently available, the only thing you can buy are cereal grains. And you can flavor those grains with a variety of spices, but ultimately it's just those grains going into children. And the other problem is it presents a large volume. There's too much food to eat. Fat actually reduces that volume. There is legumes, fruits and vegetables, and milk intake is low. So it's not just that we are giving a high caloric intake value. We are giving it in a financial norm that isn't enough. And to be honest, if you actually looked at it, for those children who are not malnourished, then that gap is half. And with the same norms, you can actually begin to bring in fat and other things if you really think hard about it. So this is the first implication for children. But there is a more serious implication and a very sensitive implication. The question is severe acute malnutrition, which was Dr. Gopalan's serious concern. Question: how much energy do you feed a malnourished child? The aim that is there in what we call therapeutic feeding is that you want to have a child to catch up its weight from -3 weight for height to -2 weight for height in a hurry, in about 3 weeks. You want it done like that, very fast. And the reason you want that done is because you think that your child, its weight for height, as look at the graph, has reduced very rapidly. So you want a V-shaped recovery where you very rapidly bring it back up. This led to the concept of therapeutic feeding, which is very high calories, which in the old days we'd call it hyperalimentation. And hyperalimentation is a bad word today, to be honest. But at the end of the day, this V-shaped recovery, by the way, they're talking about this for economics for COVID. But it is something where if something dramatically went down, you want it to dramatically go up again. And as a result, The feeding norm in India is 200 kilocalories per kg per day. Remember what the normal requirement was. It was 80 in the graph, in the figures I showed you earlier. That's why I pointed that out. So from 80 to catch up growth, it has gone to 200. And this is now in a part of the Niti Aayog documents. Ask yourself, what is the requirement? The WHO published this guideline in which they said it's not 200, it's 100 to 135 kilocalories per kg per day. Now, straight away, you see a difference. We gave a single value, WHO wants to give a range. So you really have to get back to your nutrition basics to understand how this was calculated. It was calculated actually by experiments done by John Waterlow in Jamaica, in which what he did was he measured the weight gain of children who are undernourished, and he also had a close watch on what they were eating and energy. And he measured both energy in and energy out. So he collected fecal energy as well. And he looked at this net energy intake. He looked at weight gain on a daily basis in different children. He plotted them. And when you plot that, he got a slope. And that said that for every gram of tissue that was gained, it required 4.3 kilocalories. Now, this is something you can do. In India, it's very easy. If you just take the trouble to actually figure out how much children are eating and how much weight they're putting on, you can plot the same plot and get this slope. Now, this slope, again, John did that in Jamaica, but you can actually break it up. If you want to say, well, if I build a house, there's a cost of material and there's a cost of labor. So what was the cost of materials here? It works like this. What you're saying is that every gram of weight, you want to put on 30% fat and 70% lean. That's a good body composition. Now, if you consider 30% fat and lean, remember, fatty tissue has 15% cytoplasm, so it's only 85% fat. Lean tissue is mainly water. There's only 20% protein there. So if you actually calculate what is the fat required for 1 gram weight and how much protein for 1 gram weight gain, it comes to these numbers. Now you can look at the caloric requirement for that. The caloric requirement for fat is 9.37. The caloric requirement for protein is 5.67. Now, I know many of the nutrition students are going to jump up and down and say, what is wrong with this man? Does he not know that fat is 9 calories per gram, protein is 4 calories per gram? That's textbook. Well, those are what you call the Atwater factors. And the Atwater factors were based by Otis Atwater actually figuring out what was called metabolizable energy equivalence of fat and protein. In other words, if you ate fat, you would not absorb all of it. Some of it would only get into your body. So from 9.37, which is the true energy of fat, what was available to your body was 9. Now you can tell me, who's Atwater? Why do you care about what he measured? Well, it's up to you. Measure it yourself. And what did Atwater do? He fed it, he collected the feces, he looked at the losses, and he looked at what happened in the body. It's the same basic nutrition principles, but in the textbooks, Atwater's factors of 9 and 4 have become literally cast in stone. But all of you who are nutrition students should know that the gross energy of fat, if you put it into a bomb calorimeter and actually measure the energy, is 9.37 and 5.67. So if you multiply 9.37 into this, 5.67 into this, you will find that you require 0.8 calories for this amount of fat, 2.37 for this amount of protein, add them up, it's 3.2 calories per gram, and go to the top of the slide, the total requirement is 4.3. Therefore, for the labor, you require about 1 calorie per gram. This is beautiful work, and it was based on very simple measurements done by John Waterlow, and I just wish we would do it here if we really wanted to question these things. Fair enough. But let's say that we accept what John Waterlow did, which in turn the FAO also, the WHO also accepted. Now the difference was that in the WHO they began to think, well, is it possible that sometimes when you feed children very aggressively, they don't put on 30% fat, they put on 50% fat. So it's 50-50. Well, the cost goes up a little to 5.5. That's the only difference. But at the end of the day, the WHO took a growth rate of 5 grams or 10 grams per kg per day. They did those cost calculations, and you'll find that they got 101 or 123 for a fat ratio of 70 to 30%. For 50 to 50, they got for 10 grams per kg, 135. And so you look at the range, it is 100 for 5 grams per kg per day, where more lean tissue is put on, and 135 where more fat tissue is put on, but it's at a higher growth rate. So that's where this range came from. So again, you have to think, what do you want? Do you want a better composition? Do you want a slower weight gain per day? It's up to you. And in context, I want to tell you, this 5 grams per kg per day, 10 grams per kg per day, ask yourself, what is the normal growth rate of a child in this age range? It's much less than 1 gram per kg per day. So what you're trying to achieve in this rapid catch-up is almost the way a fetus will grow. It's a fetal growth rate. And in reality, in India, we have never seen a growth rate of greater than 5 gram per kg per day. And this is, I've actually talked to Dr. Radhakrishna, who's to run the very successful malnourished ward in the Nilufar Hospital of NIN. And he always says that they never got greater than 5. They got about 3. And there's a downside of feeding so much. You have to give a very high energy density. Otherwise, it's too much food for that child. And when you do that and you give a huge amount of caloric density, huge amount of calories, Dr. Radhakrishna has actually observed the refeeding syndrome occurring when phosphate levels drop in these children. It is also oily and sweet. You set taste preferences for later. You may get a high fat. And this RUTF, as it's called, contains a lot of potassium. You should think about it. That's another day, another discussion. I just want to show you this experiment where rats were fed the same RUTF type diet after being undernourished. And after that, when they were fed that for 16 weeks, the liver fat increased 3-fold when they were fed RUTF. So it's worth thinking about that. We never measure liver enzymes. And it's worth thinking about that when you give 200 kilocalories per kg per day. And remember, there's this big hurry, the V-shaped recovery. That is because in many earlier studies that were done in Congo, Bangladesh, and other places, they found the mortality rate was very high in these SAM kids. And the odds ratio also was very high. And in order to bring that odds ratio down from this 10 times to lesser amounts, that was why RUTF was given, to get them to gain their weight. But the truth is that there was a study done by Dr. Sachdev in Orissa and Jharkhand. And he found that the mortality in India was not that much. It was only about 1% in children with SAM. It was not this value of 20%. And that tells you something, that one possibility is that this diagnosis requires, it has the word acute in it. Acute means you measured something losing over time. But actually the diagnosis of SAM is by no means a time-based diagnosis. It's a static diagnosis, and we have to ask, is the severe malnutrition chronic and persistent and not acute in India? So these are my final thoughts. And I do want to just say that, we have to be mindful of the extra energy at all ages. There's lots of implications for you to think about. But I do want to tell you that it is Dr. Gopalan who really, to me, he stimulated and made us think. And he made us think of one thing, and that was, don't accept metrics and don't accept things that are told to you from international research. It has to be local research. It has to be local experience. And the dialectic that you have, the dialectic that he subjected me to in his office upstairs in NFI, that dialectic is what should really inform opinions and policy in India. Thank you. Dr. Prema, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kurpa. That is a real lecture which Dr. Gopalan would have enjoyed and would have debated with you for the next 1 hour. But we have about 10 minutes for the next question-answer session. And Mr. Chauhan will guide you through that by projecting what are the questions that are coming through. We will take only such questions that can be answered within a 7 to 10 minute period. Is that acceptable? Mr. Chauhan, you are going to take over.
Yes, ma'am. So, dear participants, I am going to send you a link on which you can write your questions. Please write your question and with your name. I have shared the link in the chat box, and I am going to share the questions on my screen.
Yes.
Dr. Nura, can you see my screen?
Yes.
There are two questions.
Yes. Okay. First question is the heart monitor, is it significant? Is it accurate? Yes, it is. It is accurate if you do it right. The problem is the factor you use to convert the heart rate to total energy expenditure. That varies between individuals. So the only way you can do it is by actually having each individual go through certain activities and actually plot their heart rate for each activity, get the slope of that requirement. And once you have that slope, that is the factor. So it is an individualized factor. And if you can do that, you get an accurate value. Otherwise, it's an average. It's not as good as double labeled water. Okay, I hope that answers that question. Can you elaborate on the carbohydrate Rda? Well, really, that's a good question, and it's very topical, and everyone's worried about the carbohydrate. We don't have a requirement or an Rda at all. We just have a range of requirements of percent carbohydrate, and I think we have given it as 55 to 65, if I'm not mistaken. But typically, we think about 60% of your diet should be carbohydrate. There are several people who work with diabetes who actually think, and Dr. Kamala Krishnasamy is one of them, who would probably say that, well, it should be lower than that. So I think that is for individuals in clinics to actually start putting into place and giving us their opinion on whether that works or not. Because if you reduce carbohydrate, the only thing you can increase is fat or protein. Otherwise, you're stuck. So what do you want to increase? Because too much protein isn't a great thing, too much fat, well, you have to think about it. So I'd say 60% actually works if you've got 10% protein and 30% fat. It could go down to 55 if you make it 15% and 30%. I hope that answers that question. Why is there a difference in PAL of men and women to such an extent? There's no difference in PAL for men and women. There's a difference in their weight. Otherwise, there's no difference. Please look at those slides, and I think Dr. Prema will share a PDF of this. What would be the norm for food regulations? Oh, for food there is no. So here's the thing: RDA should not be used. It is only the EAR. I hope that's very, very clear. Is there a correction for quality of energy from food applied when recommending diets? I don't know what you mean by that, but if you mean the digestibility of carbohydrates, if that's what you mean, yes, you have to correct for that. The next question is, the new EER for 4 to 9 years is the same, similar. Yeah, the fact is that we didn't have data for Indian children, so we kept it where it was. You're absolutely right. There's a good reason for us to actually generate data in India. How do you address SAM in the present state of COVID-19 and yet also think of body composition? I would tell you this, that actually given the problems with COVID and the potential collapse, I'm not sure there is a collapse, but there are in some places a collapse of systems. Under those conditions, when society is in trouble, I would say then you need a high-fat kind of system. But otherwise, I really think if SAM, uncomplicated SAM, can be treated at home, it is the best way to do it. And if it is, again, we say acute. Who measured acute in SAM? But did anyone ask, did that child lose weight? That is never asked. It is just what is the weight for height. Yet in the title of SAM, it is said acute. Acute means a history of weight loss, never measured. And if it was never measured, I think this is important. Please measure it. If we are actually finding children with a history, and by the way, if there is an epidemic of diarrhea, an epidemic of other diseases, then yes, you would expect weight to go down very rapidly. But if there's no epidemic, and by the way, you can't equate COVID to that, like diarrhea, then I think home-based treatment is best. Body composition, I really wish some nutritionists would start doing this. Really. You can do what John Waterloo did in Jamaica and change the world. Next is normal daily intake of sugar. Well, truth be told, I don't know when you say normal, are you saying what we recommend? What we recommend is less the better. And right now we are recommending less than 10% of the total energy. The next question is, can you elaborate percent energy? I just went through that before, energy, proteins, and fat. I said it should be 55 to 60 carbohydrate, protein 10 to 15, fat 30, and that should be fine. Or even less fat is okay. How high can the protein? Good question. So the way this was discovered was when they looked at Arctic explorers who used to carry dried meat with them when they walked in the Arctic. And at that point, because it was all meat and fat, their protein calories was 40%. At 40%, they all started getting headaches and they felt fuzzy-headed and so on. So it is, the WHO has set the highest value for protein calories as 40, but that's too high. Honestly, if you take milk, if you just drank milk all day, milk contains 20% of its calories as protein. So think about that. It should be somewhere lower than that. So I would say in India, 15 is a great value. Do we look at RDA or EAR for other nutrients? Oh, please, you only look at EAR. Only EAR. Next. F75, F100 are widely followed. Well, if you think about it, the F100 is actually a reasonable formula. It gives you about 100 to 135. To get up to 200, you have to actually pour oil into that F100. That's my point. That F100 is fine. But you don't need to go for these high oil things. The reason people started going for high oil was because in broken societies, where there's disaster or war, where systems don't exist, then food rotting became a problem. They found that high oil made it more easy to preserve that food over periods of time. So that's why it went to high oil. But India is not a broken society, even with COVID. So I don't think there's any reason for us to put oil into what we're doing. Simple home food can meet it. If you're sticking to 100 calories per kg per day, you can do it with home food. Next, please. What are the EER reductions? Why are seen more in? Yeah, it's because of the data we got from a DLW study. It's because of the problem of overweight that is just zooming up in this country. And overweight is a serious problem in this country because what that overweight hides is a mountain of fat inside the body. We don't need to be obese and huge in size. At overweight itself, we have too much fat in our bodies. So it is really important that given the diabetes rate that is just increasing in this country, that we do our best to suggest that people should eat less, but it goes hand in hand with exercise more. And the last one, pregnant women. I think I will leave this to Dr. Prema. She's going to cover this. So I'll go to the next one. Could you please elaborate? Oh, there's no reduction in the protein requirement. The protein requirement that is there in the book is very much the EAR that is there, and we have given the RDA as a safe requirement. Earlier in the 2015 RDA, we had considered putting a value for the quality of protein. So we multiplied the value upwards for a low quality protein. That is something you should do even now. If someone is eating low quality protein, it is given in that RDA chapter. What are the factors by which you should increase the protein requirement. So please don't say we have reduced it. It is the true requirement of quality protein. If it is low quality protein, of course it should be increased.
Dr. Kurpad,
Yes.
I'm sure you will answer. There are going to be another 200 questions. We will mail them to you. Will you answer them at leisure over the next 10 days? Because you have touched on so many aspects. I have half a dozen questions. And I'm sure I can't even write them, but that doesn't mean I will not communicate with you. So may I request all the participants to now write all the questions that they want to ask Dr. Kurpad. He, being a very generous person and a teacher, would over the next fortnight review all your questions and reply as many of them as is possible for him. And can I really thank Dr. Kurpad for having given us the best start for today's proceedings. Thank you so very much.
You are really the greatest custodian of Dr. Gopalan's legacy. So for me, it's a great honor to have you present here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Amit, can I?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Dr. Dave will
start your present.
Yeah, I will share now. Dr. Dave will briefly introduce me, saying, sir, you know me, so you are going to speak extempore. We are not going to tell you anything.
Introducing you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I have learned for so many days, even when she was working in the planning commission in the government of India, and she was also part of nutrition. So I think she was nutrition. And she did very well, and I know that this institution is there working for her. She is working for this institution. Also, she has a lot of knowledge on nutrition in India. And not only that, the type of nutrition which is required for our poor children. I had one question to ask you. What are these roaming on the streets and all that, and they look pretty healthy and all that, which bothers me a little bit. I would also like to tell you, medicine in All India Institute of Medical Sciences, if you understand Hindi, he used to say that these farmers 20 rotis, and they don't have any protein and malnutrition. And stuck in my mind right through that time that there was. I also want to tell you that it was very, very important to talk of kosher. Perhaps, I don't know, Dr. Prema can tell more. But kosher was not really, in this country, I don't think kosher. Maybe she can correct me if I'm wrong. Dr. Prema Ramchandran.
Thank you, sir. You really have our dilemma into one brief question. How do we define undernutrition in a country where people are small stature? And that is what we are going to discuss by discussing the energy requirement during pregnancy. Pregnant women are nutritionally a very vulnerable group. All the research carried out in developed countries, mostly UK and USA, indicated that as of 1950, about 10 kg is the weight gain in these women, and their offsprings weighed around 3.1 kg. Require additional energy for various things. One, very obvious, is the growing infant, especially in the second and third trimester. Second, for physiological changes during pregnancy in the mother, uterus has to grow, placenta has to be born, blood volume has to increase. So all that also requires nutrients. She is carrying out physical activities with a gained weight ranging between 5 and 10 kg. So that will increase and perhaps also physical activity related health. To meet all these requirements, in 1950s and 60s, Hitton and Leach computed that pregnant women would need an additional dietary intake of 300 kilocalories per day and a similar increase in all nutrients during the second and the third trimester. Dr. Kurpad talked about Waterloo, and I would really like to say this group of Hitton and Leach did as much work with as little support and as little equipment, and their data has now stood absolutely rock steady and forms the foundation 70 years later too. So since 2020, global and national recommendations for dietary allowances had always used factorial approach. That is, take the adult woman and when she is pregnant, add additional requirement. The additional requirement for pregnancy range 300 to 350 kilocalories in the second and third trimester of pregnancy. It is very rare that one gets an opportunity to work on same team 40 years apart, and I was one of those people who had that opportunity. When I joined National Institute of Nutrition in 1976, Dr. Gopalan said, get back to Indian pregnant women, lactating women, and do the data that we carried out, our studies in Kunnur in the 50s. 25 years have passed. There must be changes, and will you start looking at? He found that studies are always much easier done in rural areas than in urban areas. So for pregnancy cohort, we went to rural areas about 40 kilometers from Hyderabad. We found that the mean height of women in these communities was 150 centimeters. Third were undernourished prior to pregnancy. Energy intake ranged between 1200 and 1600. You saw what Dr. Kurpad was talking about minimal energy requirements, and that is they were more or less along those lines. And why this wide range? In rural areas, there is a tremendous difference in dietary intake depending on whether it is pre-harvest, during harvest, and post-harvest. When they work hard, they eat more. The difference is about 200 to 300 calories because 100 calories is not measurable. Diet surveys are inaccurate. So it is vast enough for us to year after year talk about a seasonal variation really related to harvest pre, post, and during. There was absolutely no difference in energy intake between pregnant and non-pregnant women. And weight gain in pregnancy was between 4 and 6 kg. This again is seasonal, not only in India, but Gambia also showed a similar trend. If we looked at mid-upper arm circumference and fat fold thickness, there was a reduction in both of these. That body fat was getting mobilized to meet the energy requirements during pregnancy. The birth weight in this community was 2.6 kg. This was widely reported, and in the 1970s, comprehensive intervention programs were initiated. The Green Revolution, in a way, was a stimulus. Unless food is available, how do you give food? Dr. Swaminathan's achievement in this ensured that there was sufficient food available, so we could start Food for Work program to improve purchasing power, subsidize food grains distributed to poor families through public distribution system, and also to bridge the gap between actual food intake and requirement during pregnancy. Food supplementation program was initiated for pregnant women through integrated child development services. However, India is a vast and varied country, and it is inevitable there were substantial differences in coverage, content, and continuous supply. All of you know about leakages. Sometimes the leakages were higher than what reached the population. The problem of effective implementation of all these programs, when you said give it to all pregnant women or needy pregnant women, how do you assess a needy pregnant woman? Is it by poverty? Is it by her hunger? Or is it because of body weight? None of these issues were. And the tragedy was always the most vulnerable and the most needy segments of the population were the ones who got the least benefit from all these programs. All through years, there has been improvement in all these aspects, but even now, there are vast gaps that need to be bridged. Over the last 40 years, country has been undergoing a nutrition transition. This is really, there was a social transmission, there is an economic transition, per capita income went up, poverty lines went down, and the nutrition system reached many more population. And look at what it did to the cereal consumption of upper tertile, middle tertile, and lower tertile expenditure classes. This is data is SSO. By the time it is 99 to 2000, we began the millennium by saying, look, the poor, the middle income, and the higher income group consume more or less the same amount of cereals. Sufficient to meet all their energy requirements. In other words, we are saying perceptive Indian population changed their cereal and energy consumption sometime before RDA could be published, because we debated, we discussed, and only when we were definite about our findings could we publish it. We have been aware of it and we have been discussing it since 1995, but publication came in 2010. We can also look at what happened to time trends in mean height. Like Dr. Kurpat talked, over 30 years, women have gained 2 centimeters in height, and about 5 to 6 kg in weight. And where did the weight go? It all went and sat as fat. 2 to 3 millimeters of fat is really a large quantity of fat deposited when you consider it happened just over 30 years period. This change happened across all BMI groups. And that is why, because of this change frequency distribution that I have shown in the first graph, undernutrition rates went down and overnutrition rates went up. In the NNMB, undernutrition rate came down from 50% to 30%. Overnutrition rate, on the other hand, increased from 3.5% to 15.5%, five-fold increase. Data from National Family Health Survey showed a similar trend occurred in the 20 years between 1995 and 2015. You can clearly see that women, much more than men, have nutrition. And this is a thing which we need to worry about clearly when we are talking about how much energy people require when they are becoming pregnant or when they are we becoming fat. Dr. Kutpa alluded to it, but what has happened is, in India in the 1960s, moderate physical activity was required to fetch water, to grind idli and dosa, to run around after children. If you want to go somewhere to somewhere, you have to walk 2 kilometers. I went to school walking. 3 kilometers was nothing great. And I'm sure people of my generation will say, that is norm. On exam days, father may drop you in his car or scooter. But all other days you will walk. So physical activity was there as a routine. And therefore, any discretionary physical activity, we can come and buy and read a storybook. But today, all our work domain, domestic domain, transport domain are terribly sedentary. To that we add sedentary watching of TV. We are inviting disaster of unimaginable dimensions. And all this has happened just in 20 years. And therefore, that is why we are seeing a steep increase in overnutrition. It's not because we are consuming pizzas, carbonated drinks, the kind of things that fueled the overnutrition in US, UK, and other developed countries. I will now come to some studies that NF had carried out, because Dr. Gopalan again insisted, now is the time for you to start looking, do longitudinal studies, however difficult they are. And what I am presenting now are studies carried PhD students through a period of 5 years. Them really did exceptionally good work in toiling in the community and trying to collect the data, which is extraordinarily difficult. These studies were all carried out in urban low-middle income group. In this group, which is, who are the urban low-middle income? Driver, plumber, electrician, छोटे-छोटे दुकान, all kirana shopkeepers. That is the kind. In that population, in the 18 to 29, where majority of childbearing occurs, undernutrition rates were extremely low, 12%. But please, a third of them are already overnourished in the reproductive age group. And what about people who have their third child or maybe got married late and have the second child in their 30s? 60% of them are overnourished to begin with. So whenever we are looking for recommendations regarding either during pregnancy or during lactation, we must understand the fact there is a stored fat which perhaps should be utilized by these women to meet extra requirement during pregnancy and lactation. Report on nutrient intake for India in 2010, few from developed countries that optimum pregnancy outcome in terms of birth weight, infant growth, and survival occurred when pregnancy weight gain was about 12 to 14 kg. I would again state Indian women are 146 kg. That is their and their BMI is about 22. From developed countries, average height 14 centimeters more and average weight was 10 kilograms more. So their weight gain will be proportionately more. WHO FAO UNU report computed energy requirement for average 12 kg weight gain in these women and recommended additional 300 kilocalories. In the absence of actual Indian data, we had no choice but to say, okay, let us take 10 to 12 kg as the weight gain during pregnancy and recommend 350 kilocalories additional intake during second and third trimester. Trouble is, we all recognized, and you saw that Dr. Kurpad and I lost enough number of midnight sleep, because what do you do to this to pregnant and lactating women? Unfortunately, our data collection was not complete. We needed the full 5 years to get the full sample size. The data on pregnancy is not yet published. RDA can only use data which has been published in peer-reviewed journals. And therefore, for pregnancy data, they had no choice but to repeat what was there in the 2010 recommendation. But we added a caveat. Said appropriate adjustment could be made to compute requirements of an average Indian woman with a pre-pregnancy weight of 47 kg, gestational weight gain of 7 to 8 kg, and birth weight of 2.8 kg. This is especially relevant for programs of food supplementation intended to bridge the gap requirement and intake of pregnant women from low-income group. So this exactly goes back to back with the recommendations that Dr. Kurpad has suggested for children. And sir, that I hope answers Dr. Dave's question. Now completed our studies on pregnancy weight gain, birth weight, and residual pregnancy weight retention. Show you the data. We, in this urban population, the mean weight gain in the second and third trimester was 7.5 kg. He said 8 kg, it's within that. There was substantial weight gain between women of different weight centiles. 64 to 72 in the 90th centile was 8 kg, 51 to 59, 7.5 kg, 41 to 47.5 is also the same. So weight gain, actual weight differs, but weight gain does not change. If you look at the lower graph, you can see there is a gradient in maternal height, a gradient in actual weight of women in low, middle, and high terms, and birth weight also in relation to this. Sum and substance of the findings of this study, the differences in weight and the small and not even significant differences in birth weight appear by differences in maternal height. The taller you are, the greater will be your pregnancy weight gain, pregnancy weight, and birth weight. You can't alter women's height. And therefore, please don't try pushing in anything. It will only make the people more fat. I would like you people to have a look. This is the first time that in India we have data on pre and post pregnancy weight gain. In the community study, because it was over 5-year period, we had women who were non-pregnant, who became pregnant, delivered, and we had the postnatal values. In such people, even weight gain was only less than 8 kg, the residual weight gain, that is pre-pregnancy weight and post-pregnancy weight difference, was almost 2 kg. 53.9 kg pre-pregnancy weight became 55.8 post-pregnancy weight. Obviously, this also has an implication for BMI. To have a BMI of 24 soon after delivery is a real problem. The residual weight retention occurred across all weight groups. Women who weighed 30 kg, 40 kg, 50 kg, 60 kg, 70 kg and 8 kg all had post-pregnancy weight. To some extent, undernutrition rates went down, but the amount by which the overnutrition rate became worse was much more. Therefore, what are the policy and program implications? To achieve optimal weight gain in pregnancy and optimal birth weight, it is essential to identify underweight and overweight women. Underweight should be given. If they are working too much, some work. If they are eating too little, food supplementation. And overweight women, irrespective of, they should increase their physical activity right during. So, this appropriately tailored advice regarding intake and physical activity during pregnancy, hand-holding, monitoring, and encouraging as and when they achieve the goals. If it happens, we can perhaps halt the rise in overnutrition, accelerate the pace by which the as it is low undernutrition can further go down. Birth weight as per se is unlike major alteration. And sir, here again is yet another to your question. Our children are born with a birth weight of 2.7 kg. They will grow only according to our trajectory. Not make them US children, Swedish children or any other country's children. They will continue to be small, and I would endorse there is misclassification calling these small chronic underweight by Western standards children as severe acute malnutrition. We are not seeing severe acute malnutrition because of, as far as India is concerned, we always achieve reduction in infant mortality rate and achieved MDG goals. We will achieve the SDG goals also. As far as child mortality reduction is concerned, our birth weight will remain essentially unaltered. I will now the energy requirements during lactation. We all know the importance of lactation in ensuring survival, growth, development of infants and young children, especially among the segments of population which are poorer and are in developing countries. We are very lucky that in India, lactation is nearly universal. We have to thank the people for having worked together in the 1970s when commercial milk formula were flooding India. We stemmed the tide. It didn't matter whether it was a pediatrician, obstetrician, general practitioner, nurse midwife, grandmother. We all stood and said the same thing. Breastfeeding is the best. You will have to do it. And the mothers did it. So whenever we say something in a one doable and carries no additional cost, people will do it. India today ranks the highest in terms of universal breastfeeding, and exclusive breastfeeding up to 6 months. Of lactation in India is 24 months. That mother secretes adequate milk to meet the nutrient requirement of solely breastfed infants up to 6 months. Thereafter, there is a need to introduce semi-solid complementary feeds, and with this, the volume of milk secreted decreases. 70. The global and national requirement for additional dietary allowances for lactation use the factorial approach and recommended additional dietary intake of 500 kilocalories a day, especially during first 6 months of intensive lactation. It was very justified, and I would show you again the nutritional status of lactating women, our studies in National Institute of Nutrition between 1977 and 1980. You clearly see breastfeeding women lose weight during lactation. At 12 months, they are almost 2 kg less, 1.5 kg less than they were in the pre-pregnancy state. But over the next couple of years, they do regain their body weight. A similar trend is seen in mid-upper arm circumference and fat fold thickness. So it was very, very clear that women mobilize their body fat in order to meet the energy needs during the first year of lactation. In the 80s and 90s, National Institute of Nutrition carried out energy requirement studies in lactating women based on actual measurement of milk output. This again was a colleague of mine who worked with me earlier in the community and hospitals, and later did her PhD on milk production, energy cost of milk production, and total energy requirement during lactation. She found that average milk production was well, and there was no change in TEE during lactation. Frequent sitting of breastfeeding itself reduced the physical activity of these women to some extent, and so there was some saving of energy. Efficacy of utilization of milk energy was 80%. Dr. Kurpad and his group did a study on energy expenditure in Indian lactating women, which showed that in the 80s there was a negative energy balance, part of which could, however, be corrected by the fat deposited during pregnancy. So, in order to be on the cautious side, when undernutrition was still our major problem, we used factorial approach and recommended that all lactating women should receive additional 500 kilocalories for meeting the energy needs during lactation. Now we move to 2015 to 2019, yet another PhD dissertation of one of our students. You can clearly see that there is absolutely no weight loss in lactating women between 18 and 29 years. There was no change in BMI either, with increasing duration of lactation up to 36 months. Okay? Do not lose weight. Do not mobilize body fat to meet the energy requirement during lactation. But what about the older women in their 30s? They, in actual fact, gain about 2 kg during lactation. And remember, these women started lactation with a residual pregnancy weight gain of 2 kg. 4 kg addition over a period of 2 years is a tremendous weight gain, and it can be very, very health-wise inappropriate to a woman in her 30s. I would like you to also have a look at changes in nutritional status as assessed by body mass index in lactating women. As I said earlier, undernutrition rate in this community is pretty low. You know, there are numbers problems because very few are undernourished. But roughly it was around between 10 and 15% right through lactation in the 18 to 29 group. The overnutrition that also remained happily between 27 and 26. So really there is no change in nutritional status during lactation in women between 18 and 29 years. First, the undernutrition rates in women over 30 years is quite low, below 10%. To begin with, 1/3 of them were overnourished, and by the time their lactation ended, 56% are overnourished. Really, during weaning period, the weight gain in these women is fantastic. So, the report on nutrient intake RDA 2020. Thank God, these papers were published and therefore could be used for RDA. So, they recommended that utilization of body fat accreted during pregnancy should be taken into account while computing energy requirement in lactation, in normally nourished and over. Fat stores accumulated during pregnancy could provide up to 200 kilocalories per day for milk secretion in the first 6 months, and therefore the additional energy intake during lactation could be reduced from 500 to 300 kilocalories to prevent an increase in overweight in lactating women. There is going to be a lively debate, as Dr. Kutpad said, on all these drastic reductions in energy requirement of groups. The debate is needed. We live in a changing world, and we have to acknowledge that overnutrition, not only in India but globally, is 3 times the magnitude of undernutrition. And unless we correct this overnutrition, we will pay a very heavy health price. Because while undernutrition really increases proneness to infection, infections they can be treated. Overnutrition increases risk of non-communicable diseases. Non-communicable diseases lifelong. Non-communicable diseases require lifelong medication, follow-up, change. None of it is easy. So prevention is the only way forward. And there is no other alternative for us excepting to plead. Reduce your energy intake, increase satiety by eating more vegetables. Please, for heaven's sake, walk for 45 minutes every day without fail, across seasons, across age groups. Then we will remain a healthy, normally nourished India. And even when we gray, even when our population is in their 90s, we will still remain healthy and self. And that is what adding years to life was easy. Adding life to the added years is not going to be that easy, but we should be able to do it. We have to do it. We don't have a choice. And that is what Dr. Gopalan always said. Remain healthy. Do what you can. It has to be done. It will be done. That is the only answer. So, we should identify underweight and overweight women and provide appropriate tailored advice both during pregnancy and lactation. And that is the final message. And thank you so very much for your patience here. I'm open to questions now. Amit?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Dear participants, I am going to share the link where you can post your question. The link is in the chat box. And I am going to open my screen where you can see the questions posted by.
Can you come
question is being asked by Dr. We will answer that.
Can you account for the period of lactation by the mother-in-law and all that, the amount of exercise. I think there is a social implication to this.
Yes, social implications do exist. But, again, persuasion is the only way. We have something called as mother-child protection card that tells you what is the requirement of the mother, what is the requirement of the child. It's a card jointly printed and endorsed by Department of Health and Family Welfare. There was a hectic time when we tried getting off the ground across the country in different states, because it is the birthright of every child and every mother to have it, so that knowledge can be utilized. With this card, we find that we are able to bridge all the debates of how much is needed, what is happening across generations and also across income groups. And that is one of the biggest gifts that we have currently got. We should optimally use it and get the best out of it. Madam, should additional energy allowance be different across income groups? Should body composition be considered to decide ER of the pregnant women? Suggestion is, do not get tangled into income groups, body composition, and such difficult things. Height and weight are measurable. To begin with, let us measure those two and look at pre-pregnancy BMI. On the basis of pre-pregnancy BMI, or if pre-pregnancy BMI is not available, first trimester pregnancy can be taken. There are not massive differences. Calculate that BMI. And on that basis, classify women into undernourished, normally nourished, overnourished. 50 to 60% of women are normally nourished. They continue eating the same way. They continue going through the same lifestyle. They will be fine. Their weight can be monitored. Overnourished, we need to tell them, look, more physical activity, more vegetable for satiety, and reduce your energy intake to that extent, the extent that is possible, irrespective of income groups. Undernourished, access more food, reduce work. Next question. Will energy requirement change for women with late pregnancy and with gestational diabetes? Yes. Energy requirements change during pregnancy. Requirements are lowest in the first trimester, much higher in the second trimester, and highest in the third trimester. But we cannot titrate this and say, today you do that, tomorrow you do that. And people also cannot understand and regulate. Third trimester eating is a problem, because if people have been pregnant, they will understand what I am saying. It's very difficult to eat a solid meal after 34 weeks of pregnancy. What you need to substitute is multiple small meals, which is not very easy in our country. So, if we start saying, okay, 300 calories in 20 to 24 weeks, 350 calories at 28 weeks, I would like you to eat 400 calories in 5 different meals, all of it will be rejected, sum total out. Impossible. You don't understand what we are talking. So that is the reason why we give averages and work around averages. Next. Ma'am, do you see a strong reason why Indian women are not too keen on improving their iron intake and hemoglobin? There are solutions. This Dr. Shankar is there and he is going to talk about, it is not that they are not inclined to. Bioavailability of iron is low. We don't take too much vegetables. There are alternative mechanisms. Dr. Shankar will talk to you all about it, but please don't say It's not women who are not keen. We have to talk to them and make them understand, then all will be much better. Ma'am, any special energy allowance for adolescent pregnant women? It doesn't matter whether she is adolescent, whether she is in 40s, 30s, 20s. Assess nutritional status appropriately, tell them what to eat, how much to exercise, and monitor weight gain. Ensure weight gain in mother, WHO guidelines in low weight mothers, 16 kg needs special attention. I'm not very sure. I don't think anybody can advise a 16 kg weight gain. I know the American IOM today says people who have more than 30 BMI should not gain any weight during pregnancy. But to my mind, those are drastic things, and I would never feel comfortable of giving such advice. Moderate, eat a little more, eat a little more, eat a little more. But such massive weight cannot be gained, and the tragedy would be as great as what Dr. Kurpad described for catch-up growth with various things. Can breast milk composition vary with mother's nutrient intake? Yes, micronutrient does vary, but not macronutrient. And this is the safety that really has ensured that our children do grow. No changes, any changes in adolescent pregnancy? No. Adolescent pregnancy, women in their 40s becoming pregnant, there are no physiological major differences in nutrition requirement. To lose weight after pregnancy, especially once complementary feeding is started, complaining of reduction in milk production. Losing weight, trying to lose weight is another game. It's not an easy thing. I'm not very sure that I would advise women to start getting into weight loss regimens when they are actively lactating. Let them get through their initial period of lactation, and then you can think about it. Anytime, any food, complementary food or additional milk, once something else other than breast milk is introduced, breast milk will reduce. What guidelines were post-pregnancy measures? Kalyani, yes, they were 3 months or more pre-pregnancy, 3 months or more post-pregnancy. So, how long does it take? I am not very sure. Not all will always achieve, because when there is a 4 kg weight retention, not all will achieve their pre-pregnancy weight. I'm not very sure about the spices question. I will refer and tell. And can I now request all participants who have further questions to send it to Amit. Amit will send it to me. I promise to answer within the next fortnight. And thank you so very much for such active participation. Amit, back to you.
Thank you, ma'am. I am passing the presenter to Dr. Rajan Shankar now. Dr. Rajan Shankar, if you can share your presentation on screen with everyone, you have an option to share yes. Great.
I will introduce Dr. Rajan Shankar.
Career in Indian Armed Forces Medical Services. He served for 24 years and retired in the rank of Colonel. During the period, he had made major contribution to the IDD program in Sikkim. He retired as Senior Advisor in Medicine and Head of Department of Endocrinology at the Institute of Nuclear Medicine and Allied Sciences. Since his retirement from Army Medical Corps in 2001, he had devoted his time to public health, nutrition, with focus on equitable scale-up of proven high-impact nutrition under inventions. In the last 2 decades, he had established nutritional initiatives in India and Bangladesh and directed several large-scale programs for the elimination of iodine in deficient disorders, other micronutrient deficiencies, and improving maternal, infant, and young child nutrition. He had worked with the Tata Trustees as the Director of Nutritional at the Trustees till his superannuation, and now continues to work with Tata Trust as Senior Advisor, Nutrition. He is the founding father of Indian Nutritional Initiative, an initiative of Tata Trust. Thank you very much. Dr. Rajan Shankar now.
Thank you very much, sir. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, all participants. At the outset, I would really like to convey my sincere gratitude to NFI and Prema Madam in particular for giving me this opportunity to participate in Dr. Gopalan Memorial Webinar. This I consider as an extraordinary privilege. And I'd also, at the outset, like to just say it's really been a true treat listening to Professor Anura. It is a lecture par excellence on a topic that is generally difficult to understand, and you made it so lucid. And I think followed by the same topic in a special physiological group by Dr. Prema. I think this is highly relevant at a time where we are living. As you've all alluded to, we are facing, the country is going through multiple transitions. In addition to the demographic transition, we have epidemiological transition and nutrition transition. Many of them are occurring at different parts, at different groups, simultaneously, and the double burden has become the new nutrition reality in our country. And therefore, your talk was so relevant and so brilliantly done. Thank you very much. When Madam Prema asked me to just talk on this topic, I just accepted it with great trepidation. And I did it for the reason that I owe a phenomenal debt to Dr. Gopalan for what he has done to the nutrition in general, and one area that is very close to my heart, that is elimination of iodine deficiency disorders. We all know, many of us in the audience as well as in the extreme panel knows very clearly that it is touted as one of the most successful public health programs in India, and the strategy we have adopted to achieve this is universal salt iodization. And many of us also know Professor Gopalan's contributions to this, and in fact his review of the National Goiter Control Program in the mid-80s, and in his own words, as he said, that he had to whip the program that was languishing from its slumber. That is what made the program take a new course and make a phenomenal success. I would like to narrate one, which is my personal learning from him. I was posted in Sikkim, and I was working with a group of people who had done very detailed epidemiological studies in Sikkim on iodine deficiency disorders. It was found to be one of the severest endemias in the world. Sikkim at that time, with a population of less than 4 lakhs of people, had a cretinism prevalence of close to 4%, and an age-specific cretinism prevalence in children below 5 years was 2.7%. And they did a count, actually, a census method, and there were more than 12,000 endemic cretins. That was the time in 1989, around our region and around the world, iodized oil was being used extensively in severe endemias. In our region, Nepal, Bhutan, and also in countries like Indonesia, China, millions of doses have been used, both parenterally and oral. So I came to Professor Dr. Gopalan with a request, knowing that he was the one who was against that recommendation in India. And the question he asked me was, is there a salt famine in Sikkim? Everybody eats salt, so please go put all your energy and make sure that the government supplies iodized salt to all the people. And he insisted that if the country adopted iodized oil program, we would not strengthen the salt iodization, and it would be rounds and rounds of iodized oil. And I think at that time, with a recently acquired bookish knowledge, it was difficult for me to understand the these implications or the wisdom of that. But we're all grateful to him that this country did not use iodized oil in large scale, and that is why we've been able to successfully launch a universal salt iodization program. Now, to the topic that has been given to me as micronutrient requirement, I would just discuss with Madam. I would only be referring to the RDA 2020 and just give some excerpts from it. I think the chair of the expert committee, Anurag Kurpad, explained the thought that went behind and the new concept that have been brought in as EAR and why EAR should be dependent and the introduction of tolerable upper limit, etc. So I will just give some excerpts from that on key nutrient that Dr. Prema said that I should show the excerpts from RDA 2020 document. As you all know, micronutrient deficiencies continue to threaten the health and well-being of millions of women and children around the world. Micronutrient deficiencies affect nearly 2 billion people around the globe, and they are major public health problems in our country. The reason why we need to pay attention is that they are significant contributors to burden of disease. There are some that are important, like iron, iodine, vitamin A, because their deficiency states are quite widely prevalent. Their deficiency also leads to conditions that are grave and also well beyond the realm of health. And more importantly, there are strategies available for their control and prevention that is compatible with primary healthcare approach. Over the years, newer micronutrients, as we learned about the deficiency states and their health consequences, have been added to this priority list. All of them are important, but if we have to prioritize, some are more important. New ones that include vitamin D, folate, B12, zinc, to name a few. I would just give excerpts from the recently published RDA 2020, which, as everyone referred to, is a landmark document. This includes detailed analysis of Indian and international research evidence. It includes the estimated average requirement as a new concept and also brings in the upper limits. And these upper limits are far more important in the case of micronutrients, as the document also repeatedly refers, multiple attempts at, multiple food vehicle fortification or picking up momentum in the country. Food supplements are also taking a big, are coming in a big way. Now, we'll first take iron. I mean, we all know the major role as a carrier of oxygen, but more important is the iron-containing enzymes, and the role that they play in oxidative metabolism is also quite important. Now, the anemia prevalence in the country seems to be persistently high. As this shows, the NFHS3 and NFHS4, as in the graph on the left shows, the reduction is minimal. The graph on the right shows the prevalence of anemia in children under 5 years across the country. Most states have children, more than half of the children are anemic. The earlier impression was that most anemia is because of iron deficiency. Now, this is the most recent survey, the Comprehensive National Nutrition Survey, which found the prevalence of anemia in young children and adolescents to be much lower than what was found in NFHS 4. And this also went on to look at the underlying cause, particularly as how much of this anemia is due to iron deficiency. And they used serum ferritin as the measure to find, with appropriate correction using a acute phase reactant. They found that in young children below 4 years, so 5 years, more than half of the anemia is due to iron deficiency, but in the other two age groups, iron deficiency contributed to much less than half of the anemia. Today we know that infection plays a major role, and there are also other nutritional factors that contribute to anemia. So it is not that anemia and iron deficiency to be taken as same, and the expert committee that went into the detail looked at the iron intake. They also reviewed various studies on iron absorption in India. Most of the work had come from Dr. Kurpad and his group. Dr. Ghosh and Kurpad in their group shown that the median risk of inadequate intake of iron among Indians is lower than what was previously thought. And also based on the stable isotope studies and absorption, they revised the RDA and it's been brought down, and the EAR for different age groups is given, and for the first time the upper limit is also being defined. So this is very relevant because multiple food fortification is being attempted. The government of India is doing a rice fortification. They're promoting double fortified salt, and at the same time there are multiple food items in the market that are also being fortified with iron and other micronutrients. So the next is iodine. As we know, the only physiological role for iodine in human body is it's a part of thyroid hormone. And now the iodized salt program, as I said, has been most successful. A national survey that was conducted 2 years ago by the Nutrition International and ICCIDD showed that the urinary iodine concentration was optimum in all the zones in the three physiological groups that they saw: pregnant women, lactating women, and women and non-pregnant, non-lactating women. They're all in the right range. Anything between 100 and 299 is considered as adequate iodine intake. So by urinary iodine concentration in the normal range, we know that this program is doing well and the iodine nutrition is optimum. The CNNS survey again looked at it in children. It found the urinary iodine status to be in the adequate range, except in one state, Tamil Nadu, where it was marginally higher than 300. That is considered as, the highest that you can go. If you have a urinary iodine concentration above 300, you need to make the correction of the level of iodine that you add to salt. So the committee looked at the RDA, what was existing. They took the same level that it was earlier, that is 150 micrograms, but revised it downward for children, and they also defined upper limit, which wasn't there earlier at all. So generally they've been taken from the Institute of Medicine's guideline for lack of detailed studies from India, but in girls and children, going by the body weight, some changes in the EAR has been done to adjust for the Indian level. The next, vitamin A, we've had serious vitamin A deficiency around the country, but then the levels have all come down. Many recent surveys show that, the vitamin A deficiency has come down. Clinical evidence of vitamin D deficiency in form of xerophthalmia, keratomalacia have almost disappeared. It's only subclinical vitamin A deficiency that we are finding in the population. The most recent survey, the Comprehensive National Nutrition Survey, showed the subclinical deficiency in the range of less than around 20%, 18, 22, and 16 in very young children, school-age children, and adolescent girls. So the expert committee has largely kept the thing, but they've revised the RDA upwards for all physiological groups. So the you can so vitamin D deficiency again is slowly becoming a major public health problem in our country, and we did not, the CNNS survey again showed a much lower level than many other surveys that have shown. There are smaller studies from different parts of the country, and they show the prevalence of vitamin D deficiency to be upwards of 50%. And there are studies that are showing close to 85-90% of the people tested to be having vitamin D deficiency. But the CNNS survey showed a much lower level, except in few North Indian states. And the committee that looked at has adopted and kept the IOM recommendation for all age groups. The EAR is 400 international units, and the RDA is kept at 600 international units. But it is also emphasized the importance of outdoor physical activity as a means of achieving adequate D status in tropical country like ours. Now, folate is another very important micronutrient, and India is a country with a very high prevalence of neural tube defect, as well as we do have megaloblastic anemia, and in fact in the national anemia control program that was launched, that's why they put it as a nutritional anemia and included iron folate to be given. So the committee looked at the levels and considered the RDA was calculated as 300 microgram for adult men and 220 microgram for adult women. An additional requirement of 300 microgram per day and 100 microgram per day were added respectively during pregnancy and lactation for meeting the extra needs. So the other one that has been put by important one that we should consider is calcium. This has been revised upwards compared to the 2010 RDA. This thing, so it has been revised upwards 1.5 times the value proposed by earlier expert group, and the tolerable upper limit for different age groups is also given in this table. I would stop there just to say that this document contains the reason for every revision that has been made. Every one of the change that has been made in the RDA level or, arriving at the EAR is based on strong science, and it is available. The topic that Madam Prema asked me to say is just give an excerpt of some key important micronutrients and show what has changed from 2010 to now. And I will just stop there, ma'am. Thank you.
Amit, questions now?
Yes, ma'am. As usual, I am going to share the link where you can post your questions to all the attendees. You will see a link in the chat box where you can post your questions, and I am going to share my screen now. So I'm sharing the link one more time in case if you have missed it. So please post your questions in this Q&A application, and I'm going to share my screen now.
Can I ask a question now, Shankar? Amit, as they are writing, can I ask one question?
Sure, ma'am. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Shankar, where are we heading in relation to 3 nutrients? Vitamin A and vitamin D. All are extremely important for what would be the next steps. These, as you rightly said, new concepts have been explained, scientific data has been explained, the logic through which they have arrived at the EAR and the RDA and the TUL are all on table straight. Where does the discussion and debate begin, and where do you think it will get in the next few months?
Madam, when this concept of EAR and even the upper limits were introduced in the late 90s, there have always been difficulty in implementing it, and therefore both the regulator, the industry, everyone wants to find, come up with arguments saying that they are not based on very sound, we need more data before we implement it. But I think this 2020 document idea has very clearly argued out why we should, have an upper limit. Even though there may be difficulties in implementing it, it is important. In the absence of that, see, the primary goal should be do no harm. All that argument about, in the safety, in the hope of safety, we should not compromise adequate intake is an argument that people bring. But I think it is very well argued in this document as to why upper limit should be kept, and particularly in a scenario when the regulation is, a lot more need to happen on food regulation. And also the government is in a hurry to do a number of things because they are caught with this problem of severe malnutrition, the continuing malnutrition, and they want to be seeming to be doing more and more. So an easy thing to do is food fortification, rather than, community nutrition or trying to change the behavior of people is far more difficult. Unless it is treated as a complementary strategy with the other things like dietary diversification or arriving at. And also the main message I get from the talk that you and Professor Kupad gave is one size doesn't fit all. If we want to do these things, we need to really study where the problem of micronutrient deficiencies are, which physiological groups are more affected, what is the area, and we need targeted approach rather than a universal approach.
Sir, can we
yes, madam. Yeah.
answer these questions? So can you see the questions?
Yeah, I can see. Now, the first one is it necessary to assess the micronutrient status of individuals to decide whether to consume EAR RDA? No. At an individual level, yes, that will be clinical medicine. For public health, the EAR has been arrived at using what is the population level intake and using the median for that. So if there are individual deficiencies, individual problems where they are treated at a clinic by a physician, that's a very different approach. And we can't question that. There are people who come to clinics with severe vitamin D deficiency, and that will be attended to as a personalized care. For public health, I think like what was described very clearly, it is the population intake that is used to arrive at the EAR. The second one on is overnutrition today is not just more energy intake, but more due to a deficiency of micronutrients. No, I'm sorry, I don't concur with that. I don't think micronutrients lead to overnutrition. You have the EAR RDA for micronutrients. Yes, it's highly relevant for that. And for each one of the micronutrient, wherever it is possible, this document gives clearly the EAR. And eventually, RDA has been kept more as a comparator with the previous one. We'll have to move more and more to EAR. It's highly relevant for micronutrients. And what is the implication you see for fortification? I think it's a very good thing for fortification. We need to do that as a strategy to contain the thing, not for just fortification for fortification's sake. If you have the right levels described through the EAR, we've got to make the necessary adjustment in the level of fortificants that you add. So I don't see this changing the fortification or use of EAR as something that will go against fortification. It will in fact, it should help improve the impact if correctly applied. How will the vegans get 800 milligram of calcium from the diet? I'm sorry, maybe madam, you have to answer. I really don't know that. So salt intake restrictions during pregnancy has been a concern, especially in the view of increase in that one went away. Has universal salt led to increase in other thyroid related? This has been studied very well. I don't think there are some concerns. One need to really look at it carefully in country by country. But the experimental evidence shows that in any population, when there is an incremental increase in iodine intake, that leads to amplifying people with genetic predisposition to thyroid autoimmunity. But that's a very small percentage that anyway, that is what has come. But it doesn't induce thyroid autoimmunity, or it increases the thyroid disorders. RDA 20 fortification, 5 staple foods. I think all the 5 staple food fortifications would go. We have the standards. Probably based on the EAR, the level of fortification will have to be adjusted. That is all. We've always, the argument is very strong. It sounds science. It is not somebody's changing this from one end to the other. And I think Professor Kurpad explained it so lucidly. If we are in a state where we do not want to do harm. If you can't, that stage is gone when we wanted to cover with a micronutrient almost everyone, assuming that everyone has, 97.5% of the population is deficient. But today that status is not so, and based on the available data, it's clear that, the requirements are much less, and we have to go by the median, that is the EAR. And I don't think it will affect fortification programs. If it is required anywhere, if the diet is not providing the necessary macronutrients, in certain cases where you have to add it to the food, you have to follow what is given as a EAR and reduce the level that is added to the staple food. See, well, there have been many debates on should healthy people take multivitamin pills. I don't think it's a settled one. You can refer to a series of articles that came in New England Journal of Medicine in the mid-90s saying, should multivitamin pills be taken by people? When you consume micronutrients and many of these vitamins orally, there is so much of safety in most people. The absorption is so tightly regulated that if they're not required, they're unlikely to be absorbed. And, there are few, that is why generally many people have been taking much more than what is required, but you don't see much of, any adverse effects on them. But when we're talking of public health, even saying that it does no harm, let us give everybody, it does a big harm. We have limited resources. You cannot do something that is not absolutely essential because there are competing priorities. As an individual, if people want to take multiple micronutrients on a regular basis, there is a body of science that also supports that, as it will do no harm. But when we are looking at a public policy based on science, we'll have to see, is that beneficial or is there something else that we can do with that resource? If that is the argument, I don't think we need to give multiple macronutrients to the whole population. Will the dependency on supplement increase? I didn't get that there was an increased requirement for iron. I thought that, the iron deficiency as the underlying cause of anemia is in a much smaller proportion than what it was thought. A lot of anemia is because of other nutritional factors, as well as the infection plays a big role. So this question on now that the iron requirements has gone down, do we need to fortify multiple food items? I think for when we structure a food fortification program, I think there are very well, a situational analysis of what people eat, what is the quantity, and what are the various food items that we fortify, and what would be the contribution for different physiological groups that the fortified food would be making has to be calculated. There are very good survey methodologies. Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition recently came out with what they call the FRAT survey and FACT survey. Earlier, PATH used to do what is called FRAT. These methodologies, if applied and a quick survey done, it tells you what people eat, what quantity and at what frequency, and at what addition, what would be the contribution fortified foods would make. It is more relevant if you are doing multiple food fortification with the same macronutrient. See, the multiple macronutrient, yes, there are many studies that have shown a lot of benefit both for the mother and the offspring. But at the same time, the WHO has recommended this only in situations where there is, they've also asked for countries like India to do it under, close watch, and the government of India has not accepted this as a strategy. So you have evidence. There is a complete Cochrane analysis that has also come out. There are strong reasons why it could be used in certain sector population, but for Government of India, this is not an accepted strategy. So I won't want to elaborate more on that. Diet intake be interpreted now at population individual level, anything less than EAI. No. I don't think exactly like what he said. I think Professor Kurpad explained this very well. It's not that those who are on the left of the median are people who have deficiency. He eloquently said that it could be for different reasons. It could be their adaptation, it could be genetic, could be several other reasons. That's how it is distributed in the population, is not to take that those who are on the left of the median are deficient.
Dr. Shankar, Dr. Doubly has a question.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I have seen people who are getting excessive use of calcium. They have got toxicity, and I think probably I'm sure it's a health issue. Everybody thinks we are short of calcium, and they take more and more of it. It's not advisable, really.
Definitely, sir. I mean, you are you deal with this every day. We take your advice here, and I think everyone should listen to that.
One more thing.
Sir.
I'm also the chairman of Fluorosis Foundation of India.
Sir.
Patients with fluorosis do get anemia. And this is very common in certain parts of Rajasthan, Orissa, and down south also. So fluorosis can also be a condition which can cause anemia and has to be corrected.
Thank you, sir. And I think, there's been a volume of work done in the Institute by Dr. Sheila and, your group. We are aware of it. But many of it, we're not paying enough attention to fluorosis as we should. I agree with you. At least in pockets, it continues to really, it's a sad reality that even today we have skeletal fluorosis in this country, continuing to ravage people.
Since I am the chairman of Fluorosis Foundation, I worked along with Dr. Sushila on fluorosis itself.
Can I thank Dr. Shankar for his excellent presentation? Every ambition that I have of trying to encompass such a huge issue into things that should be dealt on priority. Thank you very much, Dr. Shankar. Can I take this opportunity to thank NAMS Tata Trust for having helped NFI to organize this memorial, Dr. C. Gopalan Memorial webinar. I went to NAMS with a request that since NFI is closed, can I come to your auditorium and hold the meeting? It's not that they did not have problem, but they immediately accepted, said, come, you're most welcome, come and do it there. But in the meanwhile, from mid-September, unlock happened and our governing body was very anxious that we should also get back to work. We got back to work on 1st October. We opened NFI with Dr. Gopalan's blessings in his portrait. And therefore, again, there was a sentiment that this issue with which he began his career should also be held here. So we came back here. When we came back here, we suddenly found, oh God, this is not the best of the connectivity areas. And when I went to the auditorium was silent. So we came back and we are now sitting in my room. Crowded it is, but both I must really thank both Dr. Sarochudamani Gopal and Dr. Dave for having physically come here from the long distance where they live. It made it a very special, valuable dish. Also thank Dr. Srivastava, Ravi and Sunil, who, I had jitters, honestly jitters. So, this is the first time I am conducting a webinar, and in this occasion, I simply cannot afford to fail. So, I asked for their help, and very willingly, putting aside all their work, they spent whole of half a day here, as if they are part of NFI. And I really believe they are. I have no words to thank either Amit or Sunny, who hosted this webinar. I began with the statement, RDA is a difficult topic. It's extremely difficult to understand. Even students, when we teach, they generally sort of wander in their mind. And I don't know how a distance learning program like this will take. We have chosen the best of people. They will give their best. But audience is something that none of us can ever predict. So I told these people, maybe there will be 100, 150, perhaps. And Rajan Shankar told me, ma'am, you are wrong. You will have somewhere between 400 and 500. Shankar, you were right, I was wrong. I am very happy that I was wrong. Amit coped with registrations going up to this morning. Variety of problems in any way, anything that can arise, extremely well with patience, in a relaxed mode, so that all of us who were tense also relax. I am deeply thankful to both of you, Sunny and Amit, and I look forward to having you both on 28 when we have Dr. Gopalan's birthday, which is celebrated as Foundation Day of Nutrition Foundation of India. Participants, I can never really tell you how happy I felt with such extraordinarily good participation, excellent questions, absolute discipline in terms of muting so that everybody can hear. Ultimately, anything that we hold as a medical education program, the most critical people are you. I am going to ask you for one more favor. I need to know what all went wrong, when all things went wrong, and also what were the areas each one of us, when we tried to compress within half an hour, left out, which is very, very important, that should have been covered. Please be extremely frank and clear in these, because after the Foundation Day, sometime in the month of February, we plan to hold one more on related issues to RDA. Your inputs now will be of greatest importance to us to organize that webinar. I thank all of you. I'm sure on behalf of also all my governing body members, wherever he is, Dr. Gopalan would have also sat and enjoyed and would have had 15 more questions to each of the speakers. Most of us would not have been able to answer more than 5. That is science. And thank you so much for all this help. Thank you and bye.
Thank you, Dr. Prema. As a closing comment, Tima Medical Publishers really thank Dr. Prema for allowing us the opportunity to host this webinar. And we really thank the eminent panelists who came forward with their precious time to make this event a huge success. I was particularly quite thrilled to see my ex-director, Professor Dave, speaking. It is always a pleasure to see you, sir, on screen. And I thank Amit, my colleague, who has been a great host for this event and managing it along with Dr. Prema. We really appreciate you all, and we look forward to working with you all over again.
Sunny, Dr. Dave and Dr. Saroj Chudamani will make a few concluding remarks now.
Thank you.
Sure,
Thank you very
sure,
much.
Unmute. Unmute. Huh? 1 second, sir. I'm not good.
Let me tell you something. I had the privilege of being with Dr. Gopalan in this very hall on how many occasions I don't remember, but quite a few.
10, 12.
10, 12. He was a great person. I think it was a privilege to know him, a privilege to understand what he was saying. And I think in this very auditorium, this happened. I think, and I'm very grateful to Dr. Prema Ramchandran and others, the volunteers who looked after us. Thank you very much.
During this webinar, I would like to put my point of view that you are spearheading the nutrition in India. I think equally important it is to try to see the wisdom of traditional nutrition. Many times, see what I'm trying to give a picture about using of ghee. Time came when ghee was so badly criticized. It is cholesterol, it is this heart attacks and this and that, that people started getting afraid of it. Now, time has come when people have started saying that cow's ghee is good and at least one should consume about 5 to 9 grams per day per person. And this was the wisdom coming from, I remember at least in my village, I did not see any elderly person of forgetting names of people. They were almost, my own grandfather was 95 and he was absolutely, he could enumerate anything and could recall anybody by name, whereas I myself may not be. So what I'm trying to say, the wisdom of tradition, the ladies who were pregnant, who were to deliver and who delivered, the type of food has been a special food prepared for them. Should we not like to study scientifically the value of those food and special food, the traditional food? Most of the time it was focused on good lactation, and retrospectively, I'm trying to see that we did not see those ladies becoming very fat, whereas they were given lot of ghee along with different kind of special preparation like harira.
Special
laddu and harira. Why should we not like to study them scientifically and come out? Because firstly, what we are doing is we are ruining our traditional knowledge, and once this is lost, the memory is lost, then we start enforcing. I'm trying to come to my village and my childhood. When we were in the family, about 13, 14 children. On some days, it used to be a good task for my mother and my auntie, my taiji, we were at the combined family. All the children will be given good oil massage. And we were asked to stand in the sun for at least half an hour. And even during the time of hot sun, but of course during winter, this half an hour will be at least 2 hours. So this was a traditional thing. Rise early in the morning. Now that discipline is lost. We have started having problems. So should not we study these things scientifically That's what I'm trying to make a point to you.
Next project.
Without doubt, that has to be done. This is a traditional knowledge digital library. And access to that is important. This is how yoga came in. This is how several Ayurvedic drugs are currently in. So we need to do that systematically. And that really would be a large effort. It has to be done. There is no doubt about it. Can I thank all of you for your cooperation? Then we now close the meeting.